Welcome again to the Pro Voice Guy podcast. My name is Will Rice, and today on the show, the best things in life are free, but you can give them to the birds and bees. I need money. That's what I want. We're going to be talking about monetization, in other words, how to make money with your podcast. Pro Voice Guy Podcast, the podcast about podcasts, plus a few extras about audio, social media, marketing, tech, and other stuff. Are you starting your own podcast, or maybe you already have one? Well, are you hoping to monetize it? In other words, are you hoping to make some money? Well, it's quite possible to do, but if you haven't decided yet where your podcast is going to live, who's going to host your podcast, you might want to think about this before you make that decision. Maybe you're not trying to get rich or even make a living as a podcaster, but you're just hoping to be able to afford the occasional microphone upgrade or pay your hosting fees or buy more Doritos, whatever you want. There are a few ways you can create an income stream from your podcast. Even if you're not thinking about that yet, you're not even sure if you're going to do that, well, you might want to know what your host will offer if and when you decide to try to make it a money maker, or at least make enough to buy some cool new headphones. Before we get into the details, a word about ethical and legal issues. I'm not going to go deeply into them here because this is not a legal podcast. I just want to make clear that there are indeed ethical and legal issues related to podcast monetization, and they mainly focus on transparency. If you're making money off something on your show, or someone is paying you to say something or promote something, you need to tell people that that's happening. There are a number of resources out there for the exact laws and regulations, but if you just keep transparency in mind, you're probably going to be okay. But again, I'm a voice guy, not a lawyer. As we look at the different types of money-making techniques for podcasts, I will point out any features that you might need from your podcasting host to make it happen. So let's start with the big one, probably the biggest moneymaker out there, which is pre-roll and mid-roll ads. There's even end-roll ads, but we don't need to go into that today. If you listen to many podcasts, you've likely heard a pre-roll or a mid-roll ad. Check this out. Pre-roll ads are usually at the beginning. Yes, they're usually about 10 to 15 seconds long, and they happen right before the episode starts, like this. The Pro Voice Guy podcast is brought to you by Tap Water. Tap Water. It's already in your kitchen, and it may come from the same place that expensive bottled water comes from. And then mid-roll ads are either a little bit longer. They're either 30 or 60 seconds, and they happen somewhere, during the episode, maybe midway or so. And most of these ads, both the pre-roll and the mid-roll, are read by the host of the show, either from a script or from a set of bullet points or just some general ideas. They're paid for on a CPM basis, cost per 1,000 listeners. Minimum listenership depends on the company that you're working with, and it varies from an average of about 100 listeners to an average of about 1,000 listeners per episode. And that means for many, it's going to take a while to get to the point where advertisers are interested in your podcast. So if you're going to do that, if you're going to have mid-roll, pre-roll, even end-roll ads, what do you need from your podcast host to monetize your podcast that way? In theory, you can insert ads into your podcast with any host unless they have a specific prohibition against doing that. However, there are a couple of features that might make things easier for you. The number one thing is dynamic ad insertion. Now, you could record an ad right into your podcast like I did with Tap Water just a few moments ago, and that works. However, if you only commit to running the ad for a limited time, say Tap Water wanted that ad in my podcast for just the month of August, you would either need to go back and edit it out and then re-upload the episode, or just leave it there forever for free. Now, re-uploading is not a problem as long as your host lets you replace the audio file for past episodes. Some make that really easy, some don't allow it, and some make it a little bit harder. Dynamic ad insertion allows you to program breaks into your podcast and then automatically insert ad content wherever you want to. In other words, you're putting in some signals in there that basically tell to your provider, insert ad here when I tell you to. And that means you can turn the ads on when the campaign starts and turn them off when it's over, and they'll just slip those right in there. So some people might hear my show start with me talking about tap water this month, but if they listen to the same episode next month, they wouldn't hear that same thing. Podcast host ad networks. Some podcast hosting sites build podcast advertising right into their platform, and they allow users to opt into running ads from that network. Podbean and Blueberry are two of the hosts that offer this service. There are, of course, pros and cons to this all-in-one solution, but if easy is your main priority, this might be worth looking into for you. On to another way you can make money with your podcast, affiliate marketing. Affiliate marketing is much easier to get started with, especially if you still have a relatively small audience. Affiliate marketing allows you to get a small commission when someone buys something from an advertiser through your special link. So my blog, provoiceguy.net, makes a teeny tiny amount of revenue through affiliate marketing. If you click on the link of a product I've mentioned on the blog or on my equipment page, you get sent to Amazon.com. And if you buy the product or something else while you're visiting Amazon, I get a little commission from Amazon, which I use to buy more stuff for my studio. It works the same way with podcasting. All you need to do is create a unique link that leads to the affiliate website and includes your affiliate code, and then share that during the episode. Just like with any advertising, the better job you do of promoting the product or service, the more likely people are to buy it. One I already mentioned is Amazon.com, but there are other affiliate programs out there that you can get signed up with. Just got to do a web search and find one that works for you. But let's use the Amazon example again. So I really like my Focusrite Scarlett Solo Digital Audio Converter. I could say during my show, if you love the way the audio sounds on this podcast, you can give some of the credit to my Focusrite Scarlett Solo Digital Audio Converter. You can learn more about it and purchase one at provoiceguy.net/Focusrite, FOCUSRITE, and you'll also be helping to support this podcast. That last phrase, you'll also be helping to support this podcast, that's all about transparency. Now, if you want to check it out, I went ahead and set up that link on the website, provoiceguy.net/Focusrite, so you can see what it looks like. If you buy one, the purchase link does, in fact, go straight to Amazon, and it lets them know it came from me. So if you buy one, hey, thank you for supporting the podcast. Don't forget to include these links in your show notes for your podcast. A lot of people listening to podcasts are doing it while they're doing something else. They're running, or they're working out, or they're doing surgery or something. And it keeps them from writing something down or going to a website, and they might want to go back after the show and just click on your link. So what do you need from your podcast host if you want to monetize your podcast with affiliate marketing? You really don't need anything. You can easily record this right into your podcast like I just did. However, just like with the pre-roll and mid-roll ads, you might decide to run those for a limited time. I could see setting up some different affiliate links and then inserting them at different times into various episodes. This would also be handy if the affiliate program discontinued itself, or, they kicked me out of it. On to another way to make some money with your podcast. Monetize your podcast by selling your own stuff. If you have a product or service of your own to sell, you can skip all the above practices and just use your podcast to promote your own products and services. And that's really the only monetization method that I currently use on this podcast. Since I happen to create podcast intros and outros, it makes sense during a podcast like this to mention that I do that during the show. You never know. Someone may listen to this podcast about podcasts and decide to start a podcast and decide that they want an intro, and they might purchase one. And you can do that. Just go to provoiceguy.net. Thanks. What do you need from your podcast host to monetize your podcast by selling your own stuff? Really, again, nothing. Again, if you want a service with dynamic ad insertion, it would give you more flexibility. For instance, if I was having a sale on podcast intros, which I am right now, just go to provoiceguy.net and get 50% off That's voice-only intros for just $5 and fully produced intros for just $25. But what if I was only doing that for a certain time, which I am? If I had dynamic ad insertion, I could take that part out when the sale is over and replace it with something else if I wanted to. But I'm not, so if you're listening to this podcast at some point in the future, I'm sorry to say the sale might be over. Okay, last way that we're going to talk about that you can monetize your podcast. This is by asking for donations. You're not likely to fund a lavish lifestyle through listener donations, but you might just cover your podcasting costs and maybe able to upgrade some equipment. Some podcasts actually, though, have a decent revenue stream through donations, but it's going to depend on what your podcast is about and what your listenership is like. You can just set up a donation link using PayPal, Stripe, Patreon, or even directly through your host. More on that in just a moment. The rest is up to your delivery, because you're going to need to find a way to give your listeners a compelling reason to give you money for something they get for free. So what do you need from your podcast host to monetize your podcast by asking for donations? Nothing really, since there are, as I mentioned, some third-party options that accept donations, and you can just mention the link for those on your podcast or include them as well on your show notes. However, Anchor at anchor.fm has just set up what is probably the easiest method for monetizing your podcast through donations. If you host your podcast on Anchor, which is absolutely free, you can set it up with just a couple of clicks. Yes, they get a cut of the money, but so does PayPal, Stripe, Patreon. Pretty much anyone who will collect money for you is going to take some of that money as a charge for doing that. The only way to avoid fees would be to have people send you checks. In full transparency, this podcast is hosted on Anchor, but Anchor's not giving me anything to tell you about that service. So, where do you start? I recommend doing some serious research before you get started if you're really thinking of trying to make some money with your podcast. It's going to save you a lot of hassle down the road. Also, if you're just getting started with the podcast, take some time to grow your audience and episodes. Pre-roll and mid-roll advertisers are going to want to see a little history behind your show. And just make sure you know what you're getting yourself into, and be sure you feel comfortable giving your airtime and reputation in exchange for money. In other words, just make sure that you're comfortable with the product or service that you might be advertising. That's it. I hope that gets you started and gives you some information to work with as you begin your research and your journey. I wish you good luck. Pro Voice Guy Podcast is produced by me, Will Rice, in my studio here in San Antonio, Texas. The show is produced on a Mac using Adobe Audition software. They don't pay me anything either. You can read about the things I discussed on today's episode on my website at provoiceguy.net. And as I mentioned before, if you're in the market for a podcast intro or outro, a voiceover for your YouTube channel, commercial, corporate video, or just about anything else, check out the website or find me on Upwork or Fiverr. Hope you'll consider subscribing so you don't miss the latest episode of the podcast. You can do that on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, or you can always listen right on the website at provoiceguy.net. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram. You never know what I might be tweeting or sharing at ProVoiceGuy. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.